Welcome to the Funnel Reboot podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. I'm thankful that you have come to listen to this episode of Funnel Reboot. And we're recording this at a rather special time. It's just now a year since GPT-3 was launched. That has changed the landscape for marketing. We are seeing different kinds of intelligence come out of these new forms of AI. To tell the truth, it's quite alien to most humans, let alone marketers. Are we going to have one kind of AI or different ones that are trained on different large language models? And if they are trained on different things, what are those ingredients that went into the can? And what do we want to get out of these new AIs that we build? Since AI is going to be present in the form of many little applications that we have, it would be great to discuss how they will hopefully help us in our marketing, not hurt us. It's those little innovations that our guest has been making for healthcare and the retail marketing sectors. He is a data scientist, an education advocate, and a bit of a foodie. He's the founder and CEO of RingerSciences and chief data scientist of Next Practices Group. He has a PhD from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in, get this, Computational Biology, Neuroscience, and Biophysics. And he received his undergrad degree from Johns Hopkins. So let's hear from someone joining us from Austin, Texas, Yash Gad. Yash Gad, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. Excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty far-ranging, I imagine. So we both have a love for artificial intelligence. We know that it is an area which has been worked on largely by academics for the last couple of decades. And yet, you and I are both in the private sector, and we both make our living by helping people use information to drive their business, to drive specific business functions like sales and marketing. So let's start with talking about how AI is still something which, if we think about it as academics, is still fairly immature. Can you maybe give us some examples of where AI is immature?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think with this explosion of access to something like AI, I think we've skipped past some of those fundamental questions of what are the real shortcomings of a technology like this. And I think where we've seen it in the private sector already is, in its ability to provide consistent, accurate information in a voice that is appropriate and language that is appropriate, with some real understanding of the subject matter. So there's a lot to unpack there. I think, what GPT has really unveiled is like this ability to link together words and phrases and concepts in a way that is very seemingly human-like, and in outputting it in ways that reads very much like a human would potentially write it, which is an exceptional leap forward. I think don't want to underplay that at all. But I think as people start using it for more professional activities, you see that the things that it provides aren't always accurate. I mean, I think the term hallucination has been used. It creates things like that are never existed, cites papers or studies that never existed. It doesn't know how to validate itself or really think about a subject the way that we would. I mean, thinking is, I use that term loosely. I think that's perhaps the biggest shortcoming that we're seeing immediately, of just accuracy and the ability to really, narrow in on what is a realistic output. We're getting better at that. I think there's already been a leap in the last year on that, but I think we're still a ways away.
Sure. We have to get down to bedrock, like definition of intelligence. So intelligence, it's something that we know, or at least we think we do. Maybe we're deluding ourselves, but we've got things called IQ tests. We hand out report cards. We, compensate people according to how high we think they are achieving in their job, proficiency, right? So these are all words around intelligence. And yet, the AI, if I think of it that way, our intelligence versus its intelligence, if I go to the things that served as inputs, so the AI, its input so far, and I'm holding up a, like a classic, 101 key PC keyboard, that's been its input.
Yeah.
Whereas our input has been the world, right? All senses, ever since we opened our eyes and started actually taking those inputs in. And we understand it. And only recently has AI got the computational power to maybe even aspire to, right? If we look at like a Boston Dynamics robot or a Tesla car with all the cameras, it's at least now taking in what we've always been taking in.
Okay.
But, and I'm stealing here from Kevin Kelly when he said, it is intelligence, but it's not human intelligence. Maybe think of it more like alien intelligence. So it's going to look like a block of Swiss cheese with massive holes in it, where we as humans have all, you use that word appropriate. I love that word, because that to us, we have a holistic understanding of the world, and it has a spotty understanding of the world, and it's our job to fill in those spotty patches.
Correct. Yeah, it's interesting because like I love your idea of kind of really pinning down the definition of intelligence in this context, because I think as people try to use this for things like oh, I've taken the LSAT exam using ChatGPT and wow, it scored this much, or I can take the MCAT with it and it scores this much.
Oh,
Really,
sorry.
that's
So,
not
Yash, you're saying that if you're up on a murder charge, you're not going to entrust your life to ChatGPT?
definitely not. And and the reason is that it is very good at recalling pieces of information that is seen, collating some of that together, even making some connections between these vast amounts of information that just a human wouldn't necessarily have all of that information in their head. Like they just wouldn't be able to draw some of these conclusions and connections. But where it is missing is the ability to critically think and assess and make logical inferences about some of this information to a degree. I think it can make it can extrapolate some of that, but some of this critical thinking about what it's seeing, what it's, how it's piecing this information together, it isn't there yet. I think that is definitely where a lot of work is being done. I can see progress being made very incrementally over that this year, but that's still, I think, where the biggest gap is, and that's what keeps it from being able to assess: am I providing accurate information? Am I making the right conclusion from the data that I've seen? It's you can tell it not to lie, but that's only going to constrain it to a degree. I think there's a lot of things that it's still missing fundamentally that we attribute to intelligence, human intelligence, the ability to reason and go beyond some of the things that you're seeing and creatively think about, what does this information mean together?
Right. And what we see, and we use words like that collectively, but we have to remember this world's made up of 8 billion individual thinkers, and they don't all agree. And we have this, technology where, if we start with the, main one that we all think of, ChatGPT. So it's a large language model, but its particular training data has been carefully curated, and it speaks out of that training data with its own guardrails and instructional reinforcements, alignments. So what I guess I'm wondering is, if we have different schools of thought ourselves as humans, or as different, we have different jobs inside of a company, can you foresee a future where we need to have different LLMs that are tuned for some of those different uses?
100% agree. I mean, we're in a more global sense, we're already kind of seeing this happen, in terms of some of the principles that are defining how LLMs are being trained and constrained in different countries. For example, China versus the US, we're already seeing, vast differences in how those, the guardrails being put around those models, or how they're being deployed and used, and in what scenarios. Like, we're already seeing that, like, culturally, just very different approaches to these kinds of models. But you're right. You're right in thinking that, having each sector then really think about, like, how am I going to think about these models? How am I going to think about the training data that underlies these models? A great example is, like, for marketing and PR and comms, very, very, very different set of constraints, very different training set, very different annotation to that training set than you might apply if if very similar data was being used for, say, a healthcare example, and was related to patient care or something. Very different constraints and ways that you may treat that data, and the accuracy of that data, and the curation of that data, even though there may be a lot of overlap in the actual fundamental data pieces. And so there's a lot of things like that that we haven't really, we've thrown these, like, large language models and just, a lot of data, at them to kind of build them up, but we haven't really broken them down. One of the things that we've been trying to really think about, internally, across, my firm and some of our sister agencies, is the idea of data puddles. Really small curated data sets that are really going to be the fundamental pieces for these large language models, or these refined models that are very sector specific or even problem specific, and are very tightly constrained, very tightly curated. Yeah, it's, you lose some of that ability to extrapolate from a larger set, but then you start becoming very smart about that one problem and that one set of use cases, and how you're using the AI appropriately in those cases.
Sure. I mean, if it's fair, I'm going to analogize it. If you tell me if I'm wrong, that, instead of going with the industrial scale vat, which, like a OpenAI LLM or a Lambda LLM has, you guys have decided to maybe build your own thing, and you've put it in a can, but you've written on the outside of the can what the ingredients are.
Correct.
Yeah. So you know what it does and what it can do, and it should do what it says on the can.
Exactly right. And I think it's, again, we may be overly constraining these kinds of applications, but I think it gives us far more control and confidence in what we're going to be producing with it. And I think, that's always been my worry of opening the door to a lot of these, kind of large language models and these kind of professional applications. And then it does something crazy and unexpected, and you're just like, oh, shoot, I should have had guardrails for that. And it's going to keep doing things that you didn't expect. And if you haven't really tightly constrained it from the start, you're leaving yourself open to things like that. A great example that's come up recently in conversations was, should something like this be used by pharma companies to help write more personalized content for patients? I said emphatically no. I said it is not ready for that. It is not ready to do this on that kind of scale, and to do it in a consistent, accurate way that I would feel comfortable putting this in front of patients directly. Not yet. And I've gotten pushback from that statement, for sure. But those kinds of cases where it is imperative that it is super accurate, it's very tightly controlled information. I think that is where my worry comes in. If we are not producing these models with that amount of rigor and specificity, we leave ourselves open to, who's going to be responsible if you present wrong information to a patient.
Agreed. So there are some ways that this gets, I suppose, a bit better. You've said, having a data puddle and kind of constraining what the inputs were, but this is only going to take us so far, is it not? So far as I'm aware, explainability is always going to be a problem with AI.
Yeah.
And so we can try, but there will be some cases where, with present day technology, and I think you're pretty technology agnostic here, you would say, you know what, just don't get fixated on that personalized pharma page application. We won't be able to do it to a level that our human values would consider appropriate. There might be other use cases where it's fine, but this one has such a high threshold, right? The price of doing something wrong is something we are not willing to put in place, automate, and just walk away from. The repercussions could be bad, and we are responsible for those.
I think it's a wonderful framework. I think like I know it's being talked about in very abstract terms, but I think the way you laid it out is a really great kind of ethical framework of really assessing every problem through the lens of, would I be okay with this AI getting something wrong and providing wrong information? Does it meet that threshold? If it's something, like, oh, I'm writing a greeting card for, somebody, and,
Sure. And it's a
sure,
draft.
okay, it's a draft. Every now and then it's going to do something completely unexpected, perhaps inappropriate. And you're like,
Right.
okay, yes, a little cringy, but okay.
You're a year older and a bit fatter.
Yes. And it's like, okay, great, move on, reiterate. And, but for those cases where it is, health or, life and death kind of decisions, clearly that doesn't pass that threshold. And so there's a whole spectrum of things in between. But I think if we're asking ourselves, what is my tolerance for this, where, if I'm looking at this through a kind of a values lens, where am I okay with mistakes? Where am I okay with, the trade-offs here between speed and automation and accuracy and human intelligence kind of put on this?
Sure. I want to circle back to that part about values. It's common these days, if you go on the internet and you read about how people write prompts, that they are supposed to name a function, or give the AI a role, like an actor in a play, and that is people think, if I do that in my prompt, that it will take all of the things that one should do. So I'll make one up. AI, pretend you're a marriage counselor, and now you're going to be speaking to each party in the couple, and you're going to interrogate them, and then you're also going to make recommendations on what they should do. I can see you cringing. So just help me understand. You, as a data scientist, know behind the scene where we have left the territory of things humans know, right? Like things to say and not to say, and how that plays out in a neural net or whatever other mathematical framework is being used for it to churn out its next outputs. So maybe with that example or another, you can help our audience understand, where have we steered it wrong, or where have we mistaken how it's going to act, and we're just asking it to do something it can't.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I think the scenario you present is a really interesting one to pick apart, because I think we are attributing some personification to this entity that I think does not really exist. When we think of a personhood, I think, I recently been watching a lot of Star Trek Next Generation again, and there's a famous scene of where it's debated on whether Data is in fact a kind of a living creature, and they're trying to assess the kinds of things that are attributed to him. Now there's a wide gap between Data and these AI models.
He's more AGI than AI. Yeah,
that's correct. You're right. And I think what's the personification that's really missing here, or should not be applied here, is because there's fundamentally no sense of self, of the perspective of the AI, and kind of the lens of, kind of self-realization of like, what am I really doing here? What am I trying to convey? What should I say? What should I not say? Beyond what you're being told in a prompt. And
okay, so a human hearing it would say, I've got a license to maintain. I don't want to lose my job as a therapist.
yes,
and I'm going to see these people for a long time. The AI instead is like, you need something right here, right now, go.
correct.
And it just doesn't have
And
to care about those.
And I think on a more fundamental level, I think that, at least currently, you're not really seeing a lot of these AI models that really have that their own kind of perspective, their own bias, their own kind of thing. They really are just regurgitating a lot of these like kind of probabilistic models, back at you. Now, I will say I had the chance to test out a few AIs that are in development in Silicon Valley right now, some of which did start approaching a little bit more personalization, a little bit more emotive. I mean, I made the comment in the meeting that after testing this, it was filled with a lot of flowery language, a ton of emojis. I felt like I was talking to a teenager, and it was really funny. But then it was also starting to make kind of logical assumptions about me and just from what it was hearing, and extrapolating in a way that I had not seen from other chat implementations, and it seemed to be genuinely trying to pull information out or extrapolating in a way that somebody that's having a conversation with you would. And I was amazed at that leap that it was starting to make. This is not something I've seen released kind of out in the wild yet, but this is the kind of technology that's there. And I think we are nearing that point when personalization will make sense, or personification of these models will make sense, but not totally yet. When that happens, it will be very interesting to see how the way that we've been interacting with it now will change when it does have that true perspective, that true kind of background and way that it's coming to the conversation rather than just reflecting back what you're kind of telling it in a prompt.
Yeah, and I love this. It's first off, it's not a steady state. So, here we are in 2023, and it's so funny. We've already rewired our brains to say, okay, well, that's what the tools released in 2022 did, imagining that there aren't newer tools that those entities are building that they just haven't released yet. B, that the new tools will have the same flaws as the old tool. That's actually the opposite. They're working to drop out those issues that we fixate on today. So the issue is this conversation could sound very stale dated, but we as humans are as much to blame for that because we like to think that the world is fixed, and of course it isn't. But the point I wanted to make was some of the really exciting stuff to come is how when the data set that these newer, more logically grounded models can handle, there are great new possibilities existing where we're starting to teach them about our companies and where we're trying to go. And I do want to talk about that next. But before we do, we're going to take a really quick break. We are now putting Funnel Reboot on another platform, on YouTube. So you can now get episodes as they come out by going to the Funnel Reboot channel on YouTube. All right, Yash, we have this opportunity ahead of us to use these tools, but to inject them with our internal data and to try to tell them how we're doing our jobs and asking them for ways that they can help us do our jobs. Could you maybe either tell us what we should expect out of models that are trained on our own data, and maybe paint out some scenarios that we can look forward to making happen with these new tools?
It's a great question because it's something that my data science team is actively kind of working on with a lot of internal and external clients. So we're really deeply interested in trying to see are these kinds of models going to arrive at conclusions or present the data in a way that starts becoming more consumable and easier to work with than traditional ways for analytics. So I'll give you a very specific example. I'm as a marketer might want to look across a lot of my different paid media metrics, a lot of my campaign performance, a lot of my creative, and really understand at a fundamental level, are things heading in the right direction? Now, one way of doing this, with our traditional teams and traditional analysts, is really looking at this data, collating a lot of the information, pulling out different KPIs, and then coming out with a report that then assesses where are we? And I think there's a tremendous amount of value in doing that. But some of those initial pieces that I just mentioned, pulling out specific KPIs, looking at how they're tracking, looking at how all of them are working together, this starts to approach what an AI can really do at a very large scale, and probably fundamentally better than a lot of humans would be able to do it. And so the question becomes, can we present this data, dump it into a large language model, or kind of these larger models, and say, translate this for me, help me pull out information out of this, help me draw conclusions out of this data, and then see what it comes out with. Now, I will say that when we have tried this before, it has not always come out with perfect conclusions, the same kind of conclusions that a paid media expert would have come out with, or that our analysts that are looking at all of this would have come out with. Sometimes the conclusions it's drawing are way off base. Sometimes they're eerily correct. There's I think, a lack of sophistication in how consistent they will be in that. But what we've found is that this starts to approach a really good presentation layer for this data. So you can imagine a lot of the kinds of pieces of what I talked about being something that a traditional analyst, like a business analyst or a data analyst, would be doing. Doing pivot tables, doing correlations, doing, building some regression models, starting to then pull out different KPIs and compare them month over month, quarter over quarter, and looking for trends. All of these kinds of things you can imagine being done by an analyst, totally within the wheelhouse for an AI to do that as table stakes. It's that next step that I think that where things fall apart in terms of now translating this, and what does this really mean? Is this actually good? Is this actually bad? What is your definition of good? What is your definition of bad? And our experience of that and its experience of that may be wildly different. And I think that's where we're starting to see some of these things fall apart.
Okay, a lot there. I'm going to work from the known. So the known for me is if we think that the LLMs have been using text, that it's what they were fed. So when it is wrong, we're getting hallucinations. When it's fed data instead and it's wrong, I guess there's a few buckets that we can put those errors into. And I know that your team is working on things like fixing those, but would one of those buckets be it's noticing a pattern which is noise and not signal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's noticing some spurious relationship between X and Y.
Mm-hmm.
X and Y really don't have anything to do with each other. It's just that's just
correct.
It's just
and a human,
in the data.
And a human would look at it and be like, no,
and
I
dismiss
never
it.
even look at that. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What are some of the other ways that it has trouble with data? Is some of it our fault because maybe we haven't structured the data in the right way for it?
Definitely, that is part of it. Using the kind of the marketing example, if you're looking at a lot of these different data pieces, you may be starting to mix different things together. Like I know a question that came up even just yesterday. We were looking at some of this data. Okay, I'm looking at these different paid media metrics. I can't look at them in isolation. Some of them, may be different for different mediums, different channels, different campaign types. The context matters a whole lot. If I don't tell a machine that ahead of time, and it doesn't have any of that in its training data, how would it ever know to even think about something like that? Would it even know like to kind of pick that out, or would it just kind of assume, okay, all of this looks the same, I'm using the same metrics, and it would draw completely wrong conclusions from that?
But you're worrying me there, because if I go today into any of the ad channels that I have, they have an attribution model screen, and it's, if it's set to its data-driven model, it's telling me that it sees certain patterns. So you're telling me I have to take a very big grain of salt unless I have made some concerted work to get that data into the model the right way.
Exactly correct. Yeah, like getting it in the right way is crucially important, and I think that's something that like my teams can be kind of really like hyper focused on, of just making sure that we have the appropriate context, so we're not, we don't have blind spots in terms of the way that we're presenting the data to these models, so that we can be confident in what's coming out of it, that we've given it the right context here, we've given it the appropriate dials for the metrics that it's seeing, and shaping it in the right way, and not saying everything is apples. Some things are apples, some things are oranges, and make sure to treat them appropriately.
Okay. This is getting further into, in the marketing example, further down in the funnel. So if we, leave it to the AI, it could misconstrue. Oh, I see a new contact added to your marketing automation system. Whatever we did was good. So, that ad at the top, do more of that. Where we might be saying, no, I want to see record of a human talking to another human on a demo and making a note saying that that person wants to continue in the sales process. That's good. The other one, I don't care about. So please don't weight it for that.
Yeah, and there some of that is like what I think what you're kind of hinting at is really just kind of human intuition of what's going to be effective, what's actually going to kind of resonate, or kind of what formats and things will kind of work. And I think that those are judgment calls that I think it cannot make yet with any real, I think background on why. I think there's some intuition there that we have not been able to, for lack of a better word, pull out of people's heads. And I think like and add to our data in a reasonable way. And I think more and more as we're using these models, we're going to find better ways of doing that, which may increase the sophistication of these models and able to make those kind of inferences.
So you're bringing up a trope, which, I think sooner or later we were going to hit. You talked about pulling out of people's heads, and people may be saying, but does that mean that where we're going here is to replace someone's job?
Right.
And I'll take a stab at what I think you would say for the answer, but we're not even heading in that direction. And I think something that you've helped me appreciate is this notion of a data product, or something that activates, an activation of the data. And you'll put it in better words than I can, but as I've understood it, it's like up until now, we've just been talking about reports that help a human understand what's going on. The real destination where we could go here is that if the AI understands, not only is the AI explaining to the human something that a human will nod and go, yep, that seems realistic, but that the AI will be able to go past that into doing something with that information on behalf of a human that, is going to happen while we're asleep, or happen at a computational speed that our own humble brains can't touch, right?
Exactly right. And it's an interesting thing because I've seen this conversation come up a lot recently, and I was in a room full of marketers, kind of on an AI panel, and this question come up like, is it going to be replacing our jobs? Is it going to be replacing all my content writers and everything? I was like, no, absolutely not. But what it will do is replace a bunch of the busy work that you do. And I think that's to your exactly kind of what you said, like, in terms of these data products that kind of marry themselves well with human efforts. I think it's not so much that they're replacing jobs, or that's the wrong way to think about it, but it is really replacing certain tasks and then enabling humans to kind of serve at a higher level. So the way I kind of always articulate it is almost like in a kitchen, where you have your sous chef, that you start empowering your sous chefs and the other chefs in your kitchen to do more and more and more, provide more and more sophistication in your kitchen. But fundamentally, the head chef, needs to look at everything that goes out the door. Maybe at some level, they can trust their sous chef, or some of their other, second in commands to really run the kitchen, while they're off hobnobbing with diners, and deliver the same level of sophistication and consistency. But the kitchen still needs that head chef in there,
Yeah.
at some level.
Yeah. You yourself have kind of split this up. I know that, part of one hat you wear is with RingerSciences, and the other one is with Next Practices Group. So am I right that the way that we need to kind of imagine if we're going to be this head chef is part of our role is to step back and look at the whole kitchen and say to ourselves, what are the processes that, if this kitchen is going to be done by more automated entities, what are the things that we currently kind of squeak by on because one human can, kind of quickly mention to another, or just hand somebody a plate. There's no time to talk, but you can hand the plate and they'll see that whatever's on the plate doesn't have a sauce on it. So they just interpret, oh, I need to get a ladle and I need to put some sauce on your plate and hand it back to you. And that's all just, we do that. We're really good at that. But am I right that kind of we also have to imagine ourselves as advisors and step back and say, yeah, this is something an AI would struggle with, because that is a an unfordable gulf. They can't get across that without a human teeing it up for them.
Exactly right. And this is why you're seeing kind of in the marketplace a lot more of these job openings for AI prompt engineer, or somebody to help translate the kinds of things that you're seeing out of these generative models, for example. And you're seeing that more than just as much as the actual AI engineers like building these models, so that these people that are empowered to work hand in hand with these models, figure out how information needs to go into them, figure out how to translate what comes out, or put guardrails on what comes out. And I think that's exactly where we're going to start seeing a slow shift towards a lot of these roles that traditionally could have used automation in the past, maybe were resistant to it. This might give them kind of the opportunity to then reassess, okay, I can actually hand these tasks over to this automation or this AI model, and I know kind of what I need to do next. A great example that kind of came out of one of my recent conversations about this was, for content creation, for teams that are doing content writing for websites or blogs, or on behalf of different companies. The question was, should I just let ChatGPT write the whole thing for me? I was like, no, absolutely not. But look at your current process. You go through multiple drafts. You have first a kind of a junior writer writing a first draft. Somebody reviews it, then it goes to another team to then kind of add in extra context, labels, things like that. Then it goes to another person to then make sure it is a consistent voice of the brand and everything, and checking for other pieces. There's a bunch of different checks in there, and what we could do is start segmenting that problem. Maybe the generative model can do that first part, then it goes to a human for review. Maybe it can even do that second part, goes to human for review again. Maybe you can one day really do a good job of that last part, and then still goes to a human for review. And so what it's doing is it's cutting off some of that iteration and busy work in between, but you haven't taken out the fundamental job of that copywriter, that content creator, to then really evaluate, is this heading in the right direction? Is this draft actually, going in the right direction for where I saw it going? So it's the humans having that vision of where the end result should be, and helping to kind of guide the AI towards that, not just letting it go at it and then being surprised at the end result being wildly off.
Yeah. And I would love to delve into like how we can improve this process that's happening, because it is requiring us to change how we think and how skillful we are. You mentioned prompt engineers and developers. I know you've got developers on your own team, but I think what this is, now that these tools are here, what it's demanding of us is that, frankly, we rejig how we act ourselves and how the conversations between, let's say, a subject matter expert in marketing, maybe a content writer, and a developer, how they have a loop that allows each of them to understand what their job is. There are different areas of expertise here. Do you have any advice for people who either are going to use an outsourced group or that they're just going to work within their own internal teams? How do we foster a better dialogue between those two people to get us where we want to go?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the fundamental kind of principles, like when I started Ringer, was really around that exact kind of problem of how we get analysts and developers to really talk to each other. So, when I first started, it was really kind of building two different teams, but that would be very interconnected, in that analysts would be really understanding these business problems, really be interacting directly with clients, and would understand that end state. What do I really want to deliver back to these clients? What kind of insights would make sense? But then to be able to then walk across to the other team and say, okay, these are the things that I'm doing to get there. Help me understand which of these things I can build some automation around, and replace part of my workflow, not from a I feel threatened that you're basically going to replace me with a tool kind of way, but I know that I've done 10 of these projects and I've done this same task 50 times on each project. Help me remove that off my plate. And just having that very open conversation, really just, getting down to the very gritty details of how you're doing your work, and then having a data scientist or developer be able to, come back to you with, okay, well, I think this one thing is something that I could just write a quick Python script for and do, or this is something that I could apply a large language model to and give you, you know, content tags or thematic tags on something to better extract keywords, for example. And it starts to become this back and forth because it starts out with really simple things that are easy to envision automating, but then it starts getting into this gray area of like, well, I could do this thing for you. Would it actually be additive to what you're doing? And sometimes the answer will be no, I think that will be more work for me in the end. Or, oh, I hadn't thought about that. This actually will be something great. And I think through this back and forth, that's where some of our best tools have kind of come out of. It's really, I think, humans taking themselves, out of the equation ego-wise and really thinking through the problem of what's really going to deliver the best product in the quickest way, most consistent way for our clients. And my team is really great about that. I think they're really, across the board, very like egoless in that process. They
Right.
really come at it with clients first, business problems first, and then working backwards through that. Sometimes you're going to find great ways of automating. Sometimes the ways won't be so great, and analysts will be like, well, okay, I'm okay with still doing this manually until we figure out a better way to do this. But then constantly keeping that dialogue open. So there isn't really this separate pool of data scientists building these things that eventually will take the jobs of this one, this group, but really a constant collaboration in building tools that are ultimately going to serve clients.
Yeah. And remembering that what we're talking about here are machine learning models.
Mhm.
So they are supposed to get ever better.
Correct.
What is the expectation that that analyst or the marketer on the other side, what do you say to them when maybe the very first version of it comes out with a recommendation or something else that they say, that's lousy?
It's we've already seen it even with some of these generative models that we've been helping folks stand up, and they're like, "Boy, that really wasn't useful," or "The first 10 things you gave me weren't really useful." And it's okay. I think it's a great starting point, and it's actually a helpful starting point because it shows them the failings and that these things are not infallible, that they will present wrong things, and sets that expectation up front. But part of the process of building these tools together with analysts and with business stakeholders is making this an iterative process. This isn't just a project that I'm going to deliver, walk away from. You're stuck with this model. That's it. You're exactly right. It's a model that will grow over time. It's going to be fed more data. It's going to have more constraints applied to it. It's going to become more refined in what it's doing. But like a child, like it needs that guidance and it's these constraints to become a more grown up version of itself. And so I think that's, for us, it's really setting that expectation early and often. Like, this is not a one and done. This is a constantly evolving process, not just between humans kind of talking about the problem, but also in terms of data and growing the data set, making the data set better, cleaner, more refined for the problem.
Yes. And the output, and again, we're back to that word intelligence, but the intelligence that we perceive with that output, that will cross over, what we consider to be, all right, well, that would be the level of an intern. And then, oh, that would be the level of a senior. Oh, wait a minute. That's the level of a emeritus at who has full mastery of this. And then it moves into this crazy realm. I'm not sure how I feel about the term superintelligence, but the point is that it is exponentially, continuing on to the point where we're like, okay, yeah, just let it continue, because its momentum is now well beyond what we were expecting in the early. So you're telling people to hang in there during those early rounds
Yep.
to get to when it crosses over and then just
Correct.
continues on.
Correct. But don't be afraid to try these things out, because I think, again, setting that expectation of where it is now and where it may be failing now will give you a much better appreciation for when it does get things right, that you've seen the first 10 versions get these little things wrong, and then that next version that all of a sudden starts looking really, really, really right about a lot of the things it's doing. It will, I mean, you will be able to critically assess a lot of that. And I think that's why it's great that people are getting their hands on these tools and it's been democratized so well, is because I think it is an imperative that everybody be playing with them, pressure testing them, figuring out where the gaps are before we just let it loose on all these problems. And I think there's been a lot of work now over the last 6 months, 7 months of people just trying it in all kinds of scenarios that I would have never imagined people would be applying AI this early, and seeing it succeed in some and failing spectacularly in others. And I think that's been super helpful for kind of level setting where we're at now and where we need to go in this trajectory.
Yeah, I'll finish with the challenge that it poses in us getting projects like these off the ground in terms of business casing, because business cases are normally set around, well, this is the fixed payback that I'm going to get. And so we've got to be comfortable with a more heuristic payback, right? It is between here and there, and it has a probability within one standard deviation of being this kind of a payback. Right? And I don't know about you, but I think we have to sometimes just chalk those up to, well, then the organizational learning that we're going to do just by going through the process has a non-zero value. So if this seems like a low-hanging fruit kind of application, this is what we know today. This is the best information on hand. We just have to go ahead and invest in it. And we'll know on the other side whether or not we flopped or whether it dazzled, and that will inform the next steps.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think OpenAI specifically opened the door for a lot of this investment without a clear ROI. And I think it's great that it succeeded for them. I think it's very dangerous, and most businesses will not, take that leap, I think, without, a good expectation of return on
public companies companies have to think twice.
Correct. And so I think you're exactly right that there are these low-hanging fruit problems that are, being done manually a ton, can be, these things that can be used by, to where chatbots will be effective, or automation plus some AI will be very effective. And there's low risk, but there's immense payoff in terms of the scale at which you can deploy them. And so there's a clear ROI of, great, I don't need to spend, 1,000 human hours a month doing this one thing, and we can scale this out, and it's going to cost us X amount of dollars, but it's going to save us this much time and human hours down the road. Great, easy translation, easy ROI. Where it starts getting a little squishier is then when you start going to bigger and bigger problems, and then the ROI starts being a little bit more difficult to see, because you're like, it's going to take me, tons and tons of development time, AI, specialist time in order to develop this model effectively. Is what I'm going to get at the end going to really save me that much money down the road? It may not. And I would say to those folks looking to just inject AI at every place, maybe it doesn't make sense for a lot of these problems for that very reason. And I think it's important to do that calculation to really assess, what are you really going to get out of this? Because there's a lot of companies that are just wanting to throw a lot of AI solutions at everything and build a lot of things, and it's a costly investment, and you may be disappointed with the ROI at the end of it because of it.
Right. But we have to put that up alongside some other calculations that have their own biases. So the way that we have been looking at people, at humans, these beings that have, endless creativity and can actually help our businesses achieve things that we're not even imagining, right? A human being's brain can come up with those things. And yet, and I think it's a holdover from industrialism and folks like Frederick Taylor, that humans have been treated as the inputs. And we've been using an accounting that simply puts them in as cogs in the wheel.
Right.
And that's our status quo calculation. So when we say, because I think that's wrong, I think saying, all right, we have X number of humans who spend Y number of hours doing process Z, and we're looking at replacing that with AI. This is simply we move the apples from this bushel over into that bushel. No, we are freeing up those human beings on a wasteful, mundane activity. What are they going to do? And how are you how could they elevate as they train it? I mean, what new neurons are firing in their mind that are going to help them come up with our new products, understand our audiences better than ever, figure out retention and engagement strategies that we've not even touched?
And it's exactly right. I think like there's a fundamental value of the human workforce, and I think it will really only be realized when we're empowering people to be part of the building process for a lot of these AIs, because as these things are being built, they will start realizing, wow, okay, it has taken this thing off my plate. It's doing it just as good as I could have. What can I be adding on to that? What can I be doing next? Someone once told me many years ago, from a development perspective, always write software as if you're trying to write yourself out of a job. And I've never forgotten that, that principle of like not writing software and tools to keep yourself in a job, because that's the wrong way. That creates an artificial dependency. If you're writing yourself out of a job, with that software, you're always thinking of what's next. Well, how do I add value to this thing that the AI is outputting? If humans are always involved in that building process, then we're always assessing our value and what we add and what we bring to a problem and to clients. And I think that's going to be fundamentally how we're going to have to reshape our workforce, of always thinking in that way of, okay, this thing is going to probably take more and more pieces off my plate, but what more can I be adding? Like, I'm not just here to do those mundane tasks. I do have some self-worth and some things that I'm bringing to the table that it will never have. Let me highlight those things and really bring those forward.
Yeah, we're in for some exciting times. Yeah. Yash, if people want to get a hold of you and see what more is possible as far as either data products or just the thinking of going through and enabling these new capabilities, where would you send them?
Yeah, so we are on multiple social channels. We have a Instagram handle, Twitter handle, LinkedIn handle, RingerSciences. We also have RingerSciences.com, where we have a lot of our blog posts that have interesting case studies that we've put together. My talented team is really always loving to share what we're working on, the kinds of technology we're using, the kind of data we're working with. And it might give you some great ideas of just how we're thinking about these problems in this very evolving space.
Wow. And we'll get that in. Thank you so much. I know that you have helped people understand more of how all of this is going to be brought to bear on their marketing.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.